Hi, you're listening to Mindset, spelled with AI, a tech podcast that is shaping what you know and think about AI. My name is David. I'm a tech journalist and an entrepreneur. And here with me, as always, is Philip, an AI executive. Hi, Philip.
Hi, David. Good to see you. How are the things rolling for you?
Not bad at all. Cannot complain. How about you?
Yeah, the things are booming. Interesting topics to discuss. So I'm glad we're going to have yet another great debate today.
Oh yeah, we're going. So there are lots of trending topics. Let me just tell the listeners or the viewers that before each of the recordings we exchange topics, then we vote for topics, then we find out that each of us is more into a different topic, and then there is like a okay, so your topic was the last time, now we go for my topic. So together we chose something that has been in the headlines again and again and again. And the last time a very prominent figure has been saying the word, the trending topic that we're coming to talk about today was Jensen Huang, the CEO and co-founder of NVIDIA. But we will get there. Okay, we will get there. There's like a short, let's call it a reminder. I think our listeners and viewers kind of have an idea, but like just let's give them a reminder. What is OpenClaw? How did we get here? And why is it still trending? I would frame it this way.
Well, thanks for the intro. So as you rightly pointed out, we already did have an episode which is devoted to the way that the OpenClaw was established, built, because it's an interesting story. And I really invite the viewers and listeners, if you haven't had the whole detail of how OpenClaw started up and what everything was behind that, it's definitely worth listening because it's almost a detective story, which we don't have that many of in AI space. So it's interesting. Long story short, so that we don't replicate the episode here again, somewhere on the edge of a 2025 and 2026, Peter Steinberger and co-founder, serial co-founder, and a technical enthusiast from Austria actually has built something which was a little bit bubbling there as well, but what turned out to be an open source project, which is the fastest growing, I think, ever. And what it does, it basically brings an agentic AI, so AI which can act on itself autonomously, into the mainstream. I would put it this way. And again, like the whole left and right of the story, we will not do that. But the reason why I think it is still trending, to answer your question, is that I think it is a defining, and I'm not the only one here, but a lot of journalists agree and the tech experts agree that this is a defining moment. So like there's a long debate how many defining moments AI had so far, but I think nobody can dispute the ChatGPT moment in, I think it was November 2022, if I remember correctly. And then another big kind of hump forward was the reasoning models. So mainly probably associated with a DeepSeek R1 release, because it was the very first one which gave like a detailed understanding of how the reasoning happens. It was not the first model to try to do that, but the first which popularized it. And then, of course, OpenAI and all the other frontier labs jump on it. And then the third moment, which a lot of experts think is going to be this OpenClaw. So I would say it is still trending because many people believe it is as important as was ChatGPT moment itself, or as was the launch of a DeepSeek R1.
And they say nothing good comes out of Europe when it comes to AI. And there you go. Okay, so the story is pretty straightforward. From then, Peter Steinberger got hired by OpenAI. OpenClaw is still public. I mean, open source, right? It's an open source tool. And what has been in the headlines, was as I mentioned, Jensen Huang has been mentioning OpenClaw. There has been an OpenClaw moment in China. We will get to that. And there has been even disputes by people who say who for is or is not OpenClaw for, because many of the executives I have seen, at least on LinkedIn, really jumped on it and say, oh, we must do this because this is definitely for us. And one of the ways I have seen many companies, or like some of the companies react, would be, we are going to buy dozens of MacMinis, and we're going to run OpenClaw on my MacMinis. Then I saw tech journalists who said, in mid of setting up OpenClaw, I actually gave up because I was very concerned for the security of all of it. Yes. So my second question is, who is it for?
Yep. I think it's probably what should be also a title of this episode, because most of what we're going to talk today is about, okay, the trend is here. I mean, you can't hide it. I mean, you open the fridge and it jumps out of it on you. So probably we don't need to discuss if this is a relevant topic or not, important topic or not. It is here. But what is not that well debated is it here for everybody, or is it here for a selected group, and for whom it is really useful or not? But before maybe I answer that question, I would love to come to that conclusion in this episode. But before I come there, probably we should be kind of building up building blocks, our Lego bricks of what it really is. So what is it bringing to the user? Because then you can easily or more clearly decide if what is in it is for you or not. So maybe just a 10-second step back to the 3 steps of the development of the ChatGPT reasoning models and now OpenClaw. Maybe the best way to look at it is that these are 3 steps of democratization of AI labor, and they are following. So ChatGPT brought an interface. So all of a sudden, you didn't have to know like data science or deep neural network to talk to the AI. It brought the chatbot phase, right? So it democratized way to talk to AI, to everybody. This is what was a ChatGPT moment about. All of a sudden, everybody could try. Then the reasoning was democratizing the thinking behind the models. So you not only could talk to it and talk to it as a black box, all of a sudden the black box was explaining itself, how it is thinking, and therefore you could course correct, train it better, or move forward. And then the OpenClaw is a 3rd step of democratizing, and then it is democratizing the autonomy of the AI. What I mean by that before the OpenClaw, you could do almost everything what OpenClaw does. So it's not bringing any new technical capabilities, but what it brought was the orchestration. So all of a sudden, even a lame person, sometimes even like too lame for the security standards, could all of a sudden run an autonomous agents without too much of the effort. And this is why I think it is kind of a 3 steps of democratizing the AI, because then the OpenClaw step is, hey, all of a sudden you can do it. So what it brought, let's make it kind of a shopping list of things which it brought. So first of all, when you are operating an autonomous agent, first thing it needs to be able to do it needs to remember things. Because one of the issues with ChatGPT only, or even reasoning models, is that when you wanted the robot to repeat the same thing, you have to give it the same prompt again. And so if the prompt was very specific, like you need to explain the background and like documents and everything, it has to go through that over and over again. So first thing which is like a prerequisite for you if you want to run autonomous agentic AI is that you need to have a memory. Second thing, you need to have an engine which is always on. Because before OpenClaw, the interaction with the AI was, I prompt it, I get a response. So it was basically back and forth. Now, of course, you could have given it a long enough task for it took several hours, but when it finished, it couldn't restart the task itself, right? You have to prompt it again to do the task. So the second important thing which OpenClaw is bringing the engine, which it's nothing sophisticated on just regular basis, which is called a heartbeat. Usually in most of the OpenClaw systems, half an hour. It checks on itself. Do I have anything else to do? And basically this way, you can prompt it into working on things continuously. You can even tell it, when you finish with this task, go immediately and go into the to-do list if there is anything else to do, and literally getting into this autonomous work mode. So it's running in a background without you need to interact with it. So that was the second important thing. Third important thing is it needs to have access to the documents, because most of the use cases that we have, there is something written, if anything else than just instructions how to do it. Because if the robot needs to wake up itself and do something, basically you cannot, at the moment it wakes up, you cannot prompt it. So the prompt, what needs to be done, needs to be written somewhere. And also maybe the style, the tone of the voice or whatever. So whatever you want to kind of instruct the LLM, the agentic AI, you need to put it in, and it needs to be able to read it, and it needs to be able to write into the files as well, because maybe it comes to some conclusions, create something for you. So you need to have access to the file system. And besides that, very often it needs to go to the third-party tools to do something. So these are the 4 key things: memory, engine which runs in the background, file system access, and access over either APIs or NCP protocol to the other tools. So this is a kind of basic toolbox of what the OpenClaw brings for the user.
Now, looking at the website, okay, let me share the website of OpenClaw, because I've been looking at it while you've been speaking. Basically, it tells it in like, I guess what we want to say next is in these steps, which is what it does and what it works with. And in this section, what it does, it says like it runs on your machine, connects to any chat app, it has a persistent memory, has browser control, full system access, and there are loads of skills and plugins. And then there are these integrations, which there have been many to start with, and I guess they keep adding new ones and new AI models that you can plug in, and also other productivity tools, smart home, music, audio. So that means we have a system that has the ability to do loads of things, and that has an ability, which I guess when it came out, like, for me at least, the novelty, like the biggest novelty, was it doesn't get stuck. Like it can come to a point where it got stuck and get like unstuck. No. So now we come to the so what it does, and like okay, what do I need to run it, right? Like why can't I run it on my computer as it is? Why did people started buying MacMinis? And then my third question, sorry to finish, is why did then I see Hetzner and Amazon set up like little boxes within their within their cloud systems, saying, oh, these were made for OpenClaw, MiniClaw, and all these like other versions of OpenClaw, I would say, that you can run for just a few bucks. You don't need to buy 700 machine. So I'm confused, because there are like the hardware thing, like where you run it. Someone who is like new to it, or even like wants to experiment it, it's kind of confusing, like what's the best way to think about it.
And you don't have to feel ashamed. A lot of companies get it wrong as well. We're going to
Okay.
talk about it. So it was a bit of a hype cry. So let me get first answer to the question, why does it make sense to have it on something like MacMini? And then a little bit comment on who should and who shouldn't based on that. Ultimately, one of the, or maybe two of the biggest issues of OpenClaw, as designed by Peter Steinberger beginning of January 2026, was that he coded it for himself, for his own use. He like admitted that. So he was not taking care for things like what could happen if 50 people are running this in the same company, or what could happen if the things which is crunching through is like super sensitive. Because for him himself, he didn't have any top secret documents he wanted to protect, or like any maybe kind of things which he would be worried about being exposed too much. And he didn't even kind of care too much about the security, because like he said, I'm building it myself for my person. And the problem is that it got so popular so quickly that these two defects stayed. And later on, the community decided to ameliorate or kind of solve this problem by running a different clones of it. And we're going to get to that in a while, what the clones are and what are they solving. But generally speaking, when people saw this in technological space and they said, okay, but as it stands, OpenClaw, if you want to implement it now, you better put it in a closed box. Because these two things, which the OpenClaw has, these two weak points, were not that easy to undo. They were like deeply integrated in the system. So before the version came, which can compensate like in a software way for it, people started to compensate in a hardware way for it. And the main reason what they were doing, they were saying, okay, but it doesn't have to make any kind of harm if you make it within the certain small device. And that was quickly, as it happened in California, what is the small device which is popular among people was a MacMini, and it immediately started. I think it was not well explained why MacMinis. Everybody was all of a sudden buying MacMinis. MacMini was getting more expensive or sold out on many places for this reason. Funny fact is that Apple didn't even jump on it officially. They'd never actually kind of made a campaign around it or say like, hey, going to give you a special price for OpenClaw. Probably they increased the volumes of production, but they didn't really support it. And the reason it is, I find it a little bit dead end, to be honest. And let me explain why. Because you were getting only two possible benefits out of running on a MacMini. And the first one is that you contain it into the limited system. What it means that you can set it up the OpenClaw on a way that only files which are on this MacMini hard disk are available to you. Forget about cloud, everything. And only kind of access points and everything which are stored here on this computer are allowed to you. So many people thought that by this they're going to insulate themselves from the security problem. But then you go and on a LinkedIn and you see like the use cases of people are boasting about using the MacMini OpenClaw, and they go, and it's sending emails for me. Like, okay, so how exactly is sending emails? Then it has to have an internet connection out. Or it's integrating me into my Slack and I think, so how exactly is integrating to the SIM? It needs to have a connection to the external world. So the moment that you have a use case or like the usage where you want to actually use the connectors to the other applications, the whole MacMini approach becomes a bit ridiculous because it defeats its own purpose. Because if it can go to the external world and it can communicate, and the worst thing there is the plugins. The plugins are really like a dark net of the whole OpenClaw ecosystem. So if there is a plugin which because I don't understand the things, allowed to work on because it looks fancy and it is stealing my passwords because it has a connection to it. Now, what is the purpose of having MacMini? So I would say that the hardware version of the MacMini makes sense only and only if you can isolate all documents that it needs to work on this MacMini and let it work as a contained box. So to explain it in like regular words, so imagine you have an employee which you only allow him to work in certain room, and he or she can never take things out of the room. That is an analogy of a MacMini when MacMini makes sense. The moment that the employee needs to bring things into the room, bring things out of the room, or read internet, the whole containment of the MacMini does not make sense anymore.
Isn't there all a pricing question? What if I'm running OpenClaw on an open source LLM that lives within my MacMini? In my mind, I would go like, oh, actually, I'm not burning so many tokens. I'm not, paying so for much cloud. Isn't that the reason why people go for it still?
Yes, I thought so as well. Because it would be a good reason if it was a real. But now, if you go back, I mean, you are stronger Mac OS user than I am. But to my understanding, most of the minis which are available don't come with too much RAM in it. Like I have seen 8 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte kind of models. Probably there are also 64 gigabytes, but then they are like super expensive. I think like few thousand euros, I would assume. So, and this was the funny fact of it. So everybody was getting MacMini, but like what MacMini? So if you get a MacMini with a 16 gigabyte RAM, you hardly can run any successful local model with it. Because besides the GPU, which MacMini some has, some of them have stronger now, but there is some GPU at least, right? It also needs a lot of RAM.
You can go up to 64 gigabytes of a MacMini, but then it costs like close to 1,500, not 600.
So, and this is the point. So a lot of people buying MacMinis just to have a MacMini are not like really fulfilling that purpose. And the second thing is like, hey, didn't this all happen just to democratize the access to the AI? And now we have a MacMini on which you have to locally set up your own GPU based open source model. Like, who is able to do that? It's even more complicated than to install the OpenClaw first place. Like, because you really need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, the model will be either suffocating for compute, or like is not delivering what you want, or is going to rewrite its memory every now and then in the middle of a task. I think essentially it would make sense. And I believe that sometime in future we might have machines which will be built on purpose. Like this is let's say an box employee that you can like buy this box and it's going to do the task. But MacMini face was definitely not there. And therefore, if somebody thought like, and I have seen companies like that I buy, I don't know, 50 MacMinis and I distribute them to my employees. Actually, I think they are worse off than if you go with AWS or whatever kind of cloud provider you're going to go, because, and that's another thing, MacMinis are still hardware. So you need to set them up. You need to update them. if you decide to change the model, which happens very often, that another model gets better, so you decide to change it up, you need to go to all on MacMinis and like reinstall the model, underlying model again. So you are getting all the downsides of hardware and almost no upsides. So I think you will be so much better off if you had like a virtual container or a virtual PC where you can install it as a code. So there's like infrastructure as a code. This is the way that it's done also with the big companies. Big companies don't actually meticulously install each of their virtual instance. They have an image or container and they launch it from as a software. So there's a like service which can launch it up and do all the installs and pre-install. So I think it makes so much more sense in a company than to buy 50 minis and distribute them around the employees.
So in my mind, when you were talking about it, comparison like came to be is like you have a normal car, right? And then you buy like a expensive EV, right? Like an expensive EV. But instead of like regular wheels, you put on them like wooden wheels, which I mean, they don't like work to an extent, but will not go as fast and as quickly as like regular wheels.
I think I have a better analogy here. To me, this looks like if you look on the history of internet, this looks like when everybody wanted to have their own server.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there was some period of a time where it did make sense to have your own server, but very soon we got into the cloud and you got so much less effort and so much more scalability and so much more kind of control about or like easy to upgrade and everything that didn't make any sense to have your local server anymore, right? Yes, there are still few organizations, I don't know, FBI, whoever, who wants to have their own server for very different reasons. But if you're not one of those, most of the businesses would now go with cloud because it's so much easier. And this is also why it was clear to me. My superior bought a MacMini, and I told him like, I'm not doing it because in few weeks, maybe months time, there'll be a cloud version of it, which will be because it doesn't make any sense to have it on a hardware per se. You don't get anything extra unless you have the ABI scenario. So we are not an FBI. I said like, and we're getting there. The cloud versions are mushrooming every week, so we're gonna come to that in a while. But I think it's a dead end. The Mac Mini story is a dead end. I might be wrong. There might be some other reasons surfacing, but as it stands now, I think it is defeating its own principle of being democratized, easy to use, and like easy to replicate.
No, you gave pretty solid arguments against it, so I'm convinced. I'm canceling my order of Mac Minis. Okay, so now back to OpenClaw, away from MacMinis. So then who is it for? Is it for me? Is it for a company? Is it for CTOs to basically try to exchange their labor force? Who is OpenClaw actually good for at the current state there that it is, right?
Yes, I was a little bit negative about the kind of hardware part, but I think the OpenClaw as such, there is a clear target group for which this is a great tool. And if you ask me to identify those people with some kind of use cases or a description, so first of all, it makes sense to use OpenClaw as your agentic automation if you are expecting to have a lot of tasks which you're going to do once or which are going to be different every day you do them. What I mean by that, if you have a task which needs to download the same web page, let's say you want to do a bot which summarizes, I don't know, a news web page, right? So you can have either RSS feed or a bot which scribes the content for you and summarizes it. But if the robot is to do the same thing every morning, OpenClaw is not a good tool for it. And this might sound surprising, but I'm going to come to the for whom this is not to explain why this is the case. But if the robot has to do something slightly different, so let's say the robot has to answer your emails and every morning it can get a different type of an email or like a different type of answer is needed, then OpenClaw is a good tool for you. Okay. Second thing, which is when you want to parallelize work along your own work. So what I mean by that, there's a lot of automation which is already existing, but it is not acting on itself. So if you want like an assistant or a helper which is working parallelly to you and it needs to raise its hand when it's done, then OpenClaw is a good thing for you. Maybe with the exception of the coding, because in coding you can get the same experience already with other tools, so you don't need to go for OpenClaw to get this benefit in coding. But leaving coding aside, like research, communication, reaching out, designing documents, so all these kind of tasks, if you want to have your assistants, your digital assistant working along, then OpenClaw is a good solution for you. The other thing is if you want to have a comfort of a lame user for using AI. And I'm intentionally saying comfort of the lame user, because most of the people who went for OpenClaw were not necessarily like complete lame person in AI, because you need to set it up first place well, right? So the early adopters were not craving for the, hey, I finally can do it, because before it was beyond my skills. Hey, I can do it, and now I don't have to care about it. So this democratizing of, it's doing so much things in background that I don't have to care about all of a sudden. So it's taking off my shoulders a lot of configuration effort and syncing and kind of integrations. So that's another thing. It's also good for somebody who desires to automate across the systems. So if you have a single system and you want to agent, let's say you have a one CRM system and you want to have agent like sending automated responses on your behalf, OpenClaw might be not the best choice for you, because the downsides of the OpenClaw are kind of outweighing the fact that it can automate the work. When it becomes interesting is if you need to go from system to the system, because then the integrations which OpenClaw comes up in the box directly as a pre-configured come handy. So for instance, if you want to have a system which reads from the ERP, from the CRM, and from like some mailing application or I don't know, outreach portal, then OpenClaw is a good idea for you, because it might give you the integration much faster, with the one exception, which we're going to come to that later. And finally, OpenClaw are for people who put comfort about the price. What I mean by that is there are equally powerful automation which are cheaper, much cheaper than OpenClaw, because OpenClaw is actually pretty expensive and many people don't realize it. My superior, he kind of bought his MacMini and he told me that on a first month he burned almost 2,000 euros on credits of the like the tokens. So it is not cheap. It is not cheap. So actually, probably he burned more on the tokens than was the price of the MacMini first place in a single month. So OpenClaw can be pretty expensive if you're not using it for the right use cases, but it's get a lot of comfort. But there are people like top managers who say, okay, it's worth my time. My time is so expensive that I rather like spend few hundreds or thousands of dollars or euros on having this rather than like painstakingly going through the integration and everything. So in nutshell, I think that's the where it is good. And maybe one thing which is not that obvious, I think OpenClaw is great for prototyping. So when you need to do prototypes, OpenClaw is really good. I'm not so sure if for all of the use cases, OpenClaw is good for production repeated things. And that's when we come to the who it is now. So based on these descriptions, is OpenClaw for you? How many lines have you ticked for yourself?
Well, I do need automating like different things on different days, but they kind of like repeat on a weekly basis. And I found out that Claude Cowork works just fine for that. And it's within my like budget limits. Let's say that. But you haven't answered my biggest question, which is security and sensitivity in terms of like handling sensitive information, or not even handling sensitive information, but operating in an ecosystem which has the sensitive information. That's also some of emails, some contact addresses, some call notes, which live next to stuff that is like general.
Yes. So that's a good segue to the group for whom the OpenClaw is not. Because the biggest argument that you should not have OpenClaw is that you have a sensitive information in your ecosystem. What that means. For instance, for me, I am dealing with companies, I am assessing their economic state and their maturity, and I sign a lot of NDAs. Okay. In the NDA, I literally commit to not sharing the information with a public. And I can get a lot of fine, even criminal procedure, if I fail to do that. So having a bot, which even theoretically can do that, is a high risk. And we all know that AI is not deterministic, it's probabilistic. So there is always, maybe small, maybe you can manage how small, but still chance that it will not understand your prompt properly and it will do something where it involves sharing, revealing, or kind of sharing data. On top of that, which people don't realize, if you run the API-based solution, whatever context you give it, so hey, read these documents and then create an answer or like a summary for me, all these documents are sent to the cloud of the Frontier Labs for processing. Now, you can be paranoid or not, what happens with that, but already with this one, I would be breaching the NDA because I would be exposing the data to the third party without the consent of the original owner of the data. Right? So for a scenario like me, I couldn't do it. Okay, maybe there are companies which have not that strong of limitation like signing NDAs, but I would say even the bad thing here is that the documents as they land on your disk, they are not labeled sensitive or not sensitive. They are just files. For OpenClaw, all files are files. Maybe by naming convention, you can tell them all the touchy documents are going to name secret underscore something, and I'm going to tell my OpenClaw, don't you ever dare to open a document which is secret underscore. I can do that. Now, what if in future I want to change some of those documents, I want to kind of read out of them and so on. I'm limiting myself, actually not being able to use the documents myself in the automation space, right? So it's a little bit self-defeating. So yes, if you have even things which it was a good example of some of the tech journalists describing this, it doesn't recognize what's too touchy personal and what's general. So if you have your call with, I don't know, one-on-one with your superior or with your subordinate, and like you discuss, I don't know, promotions or salaries or whatever in that call, treat it equally important as a manual to, I don't know, coffee machine in your office, right? So it doesn't distinguish it well, and it would need take a lot of work extra to make it happen. So if you are working with the sensitive documents, OpenClaw is a big no-no. And there's ways around that because the tech scene does not want to end the story here. They don't want this to be the final answer. So there are clones of OpenClaw which are solving for this, which are solving for the security part, but that's a different topic. So finishing for whom the OpenClaw is not. Second thing is when you try to automate repeatable tasks. So this example which I gave, that you have the bot going to the, I don't know, news page and summarize what's the news for you. For this, OpenClaw can do it, but it's too expensive to do it. Because the way that the OpenClaw does it, it every time treats the task as the first time being done. So it considers all options, all concerns, all possibilities, which might be overkill. So that's the first thing. Second thing, if you need to do this task which is repeated, basically it also maps all the buttons and everything new. So it's tries to interact with the elements the way that they render. So if the OpenClaw needs to, I don't know, man some web page on your behalf, basically finds where the button is every time, even though it's on a very same place where it was yesterday, it still finds where it is. So running an OpenClaw for repeated tasks is possible, but very inefficient. And there are better ways to automate these kind of tasks, especially if you have a high repeat. I had one discussion. There was a few people asking me, hey, like Philip, we would think about automating this task. And the essence was, we would like to calculate a right amount to order for our eShop. Okay. And I said, wow, but you have, how many SKUs do you have? And they say, well, probably a few tens of thousands. And I say, few tens of thousands? So you're going to program an OpenClaw to do a task and then you're going to run it like 50,000 times a day? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's going to be super expensive. Even if you're going to be able to run it on your local GPU, still, like you're going to spend so much compute and like you're going to take the potential from other tasks for very stupid automation. So if you have a task which is well defined, I repeat, OpenClaw is not the best way to use it. And then, of course, if you have NDAs or GDPRs, by the way, and this is kind of a strong statement, I haven't seen it that way, but I went through the details. OpenClaw as it is immediately GDPR incompliant. Because one of the key principles of GDPR is that you need to define the purpose of processing the data. But OpenClaw does not have any limited purpose. You can ask it to crunch it one way on a Monday and completely different way on a Wednesday, and it's not going to protest. So if you are using OpenClaw on a data which should be GDPR protected, I would be super careful, because I think you would be an easy target for an authorities to come and declare you not compliant for that reason. So that is, of course, like limiting a lot of companies, because a lot of companies have a customer data which need to be GDPR compliant for that reason. So that's the comment. And let me see in my list if I've forgotten anything. Okay, one thing which is interesting, which we didn't touch upon, and which is probably a good distinguishing between you should or you should not use. If you care about managing the automation remotely or not. Because if you care about remotely, then the OpenClaw and similar things like Anthropic is doing and now OpenAI is trying to do is actually useful. So this concept which I explained, like you want to run it in a parallel and want to interact with it with some kind of a remote control, very often Telegram, WhatsApp, or whatever. If this is important for you, then OpenClaw is good. If this is not important for you, then there are much better ways of automate and much safer and much cheaper than OpenClaw. And then the last point is if you have a process which have a fixed SLA you need to meet. So let me explain. Maybe you have an NPS score which you want to have from interacting with the customers. Now, I think there are better automations who can keep you more safe in achieving the NPS than OpenClaw. Because OpenClaw as it stands has a very high volatility of the delivery, and therefore it's going to be likely underperforming other possible automations in like keeping the quality of the process over the time, and therefore it's not probably a good use case for you to do it. In like lame terms, I would not use OpenClaw for automating customer support. I think it's not ready to do it yet the way that it stands.
Wouldn't it still be much more expensive than using an LLM solution?
Depends, because I don't want to be too technical, but just to answer your question properly, it's a trade-off between it can probably better solve the edge cases, and depends like how many edge cases you have, but it is more expensive to solve the easy cases. And for most, let me take an example of e-commerce, which I worked in, so I understand the story. So in e-commerce, 60% of is, where is my package? I want a refund, right? Really? For that, OpenClaw is overkill. It's going to be too expensive. There are much better ways to solve it than OpenClaw. Now, if you were in, I am a customer success agent where I need to help people to install things, maybe. Because then you have all kind of different possibilities, and then the effect of solving many different things can be actually useful.
Okay. So if the answers are too various, like there are like too many varieties of answers or possibilities, then you're saying OpenClaw. And if there's like a limited number, probably, an LLM. Okay, so that brings me, so we now know who is it for, who is it not for. And the question is, why do I keep seeing these? So OpenClaw is the original, but people are now talking about NanoClaw, OpenClaw, PyClaw, ZeroClaw, NanoBot.
Yes.
And all these like abbreviations. Then companies like Perplexity and Meta started doing their own things, which sound like OpenClaw, but they called it like computer or computer use. But we already had some computer use before. As they say in my favorite SNL sketch, it sounds very confusing.
Yes. So this wave of different clones of OpenClaw is reaction to two things. First of all, it's open source. So anybody can tweak it, and that's maybe good, because this is going to take us through the phase of what it should be, what it shouldn't be very fast. Like we're discussing it is less than 2 months ago when this happened, right?
Yep.
And we already have 15 versions of it, which each of them has a sense and a use case, right? So I think it's good. I would see this, there's a lot of different things, but if you really zoom out, I think there's 3 streams to it. So let me try to kind of categorize them. So one stream is solving thing which we didn't discuss so far, but Peter Steinberger, the original OpenClaw, programmed it pretty quick and dirty. It was consuming a lot of RAM. It was having, 50 or 60 libraries it was depending on. So it was almost like a nightmare to make sure that you have all the libraries that it needs, and so on and so on. So It was written quick and dirty. Now, the first line of different versions of OpenClaw, which community did, was to make it lightweight. And why this so? Because exactly this case, if you have a MacMini with, I don't know, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the mere engine itself consumes most of it, or like a significant part of it, then it's going to suffocate for oxygen to actually do anything, right? Because it's going to have not enough resources to work, or it's going to be slow. So that's one thing. And then also, if you need to have a cloud sandbox or cloud virtual PC, I mean, you better have a cheaper one. So if you need to have a big one just because the code is written quick and dirty, it doesn't make sense at all. So what we're trying to do is Nanobot, NanoClaw, ZeroClaw, and PicoClaw are all going in the direction of giving you almost the same functionality. So like not compromising on features, but significantly reducing the footprint of the solution, and down to the point that some of them are even already like a container by itself. So what it means, you don't need to kind of install it in a way. You give it to the cloud provider, and they can kind of spin up an instance for you which is already in it. This is what you talk about the AWS and other companies. So they are using one of these lightweight versions to make it happen. So that's one line, lightweight. The second line is a secured versions. So as we said, the biggest issue was that it was programmed in a way. It is actually pretty fascinating because the original version 1 by Peter Steinberger had even passwords openly available to anybody. Of course, then they fixed it pretty quickly because that was like a big mess. But if you were unlucky to get the image of the very, very early versions, even the passwords were exposed in a file where everybody can take the file. It was even named specifically, so it didn't have to look for it. You know exactly where it is, and you could take it. So then the versions of the IronClaw, OpenFAC, and Moldworker are attempt on bringing this into, let's say, enterprise-ready version. And this is also my advice. So if you are a company which wants to implement agentic automation on scale, rather than buying MacMinis, I would suggest get a cloud instances and with IronClaw, Moldworker, or OpenFang. This is much better idea because you can get all the benefits and you get much more secure environment to go there. Now, there is a third line, which took for me surprisingly long, and I am shocked why OpenAI is not in it yet. Because my expectation of Peter Steinberger joining OpenAI was that they're going to immediately kind of go out with some version of the OpenClaw, which is adopted to OpenAI stack closer and is solving the security issues and the other things. Till the moment, we're discussing this like second half of March, till the moment, no version like that was ever released, which is like a surprise to me because other companies who have not integrated the original author of the OpenClaw already have those versions. So I'm wondering, like, what the heck is going on in OpenAI? I think they lost the momentum which they originally gained by onboarding Peter Steinberger and like getting this, let's say, privileged access to that technology.
Wouldn't that be connected to the new red code that's happening at OpenAI, led by Fujisimo, about the distractions? Or would you say this is not a distraction, this is something that's central?
First of all, as I said, I find this equally important as ChatGPT moment or like reasoning models. So this is not a distraction. And like the amount of interest, like we're going to come to that, NVIDIA has its own version of it. So if NVIDIA thinks that it is worth the having version of it, probably it's not kind of a distraction, right? But secondly, even if I like say, okay, we are not sure if it is distraction or not, but they bought it after the red code. Right? So they kind of onboarded Peter Steinberger after the red code. So they were already in a mode, we don't care about the distractions left and right, and they still went for it. So that doesn't kind of add up for me in this equation. So either it was distraction and then you shouldn't have jumped on it, or it was not a distraction, but like then if it is mainstream, you should give it enough firepower to actually make it happen. So honestly, like the play of OpenAI in OpenClaw is the biggest surprise for me. Really the biggest surprise because it's not there. They didn't take so far any meaningful advantage, and the other versions are mushrooming and like stealing. So maybe we are waiting for some kind of a grandiose launch of it, and they're gonna make my statement now ridiculous or irrelevant. But so far, it's not there, and it's like a biggest surprise to me. But like getting to the point of 3 lines. So I mentioned the lightweight. I mentioned the security one. The third one is one thing which you also alluded to, and that was that the companies started to do, let's say, a proprietary versions of the OpenClaw. Now, again, it's a good analogy of the Linux system. So Linux by itself is like vanilla, you can get it, but then there are different clones of Linux, right? You can get Ubuntu, you can get Red Hat, you can get like different packagings of that. And this is a little bit what is happening in the environment of the OpenClaw as well. So funny enough, and this was a bit surprise to me, they all started to call it computer. And I don't know if this is some kind of a background agreement, a collusion of the companies, or it was coincidence, but it doesn't sound like coincidence if 3 companies actually name it computer. So I think what is running in the mindset of the companies building their own proprietary version is this is a little bit like you getting a computer in 90s. So this is like a step change of a moment where you get to the point that you can get a new, different way of working, which would just confirm that it is equally important as ChatGPT or reasoning models as another
But
stage.
isn't it closer to agent than computer?
Maybe we are like thinking about it. Maybe we are just over bombarded with the agent AI in last year or two. So we were kind of seeing it through that prism. Maybe if I erase all the discussion about agenting AI, which happened before the OpenClaw launch, it might sound a little bit like computer. For me, it's more like an employee, to be honest. And I'm going to come to that in a while when I'm going to describe like what this means for the future of the OpenClaw. But yeah, Perplexity calls it a computer. Meta, via acquisition of the Manus, calls it computer as well. Adaptive calls it computer. So there are already 3 versions of, let's say, agentic system, which is kind of calling it computer, and therefore it's probably more to stay. Probably it's going to prevent others to do it, so now they see. But it's interesting that all of them see it as a computer. The only exception is NVIDIA, which I think they call it NanoClaw, and this is because they have this Nemotron brand, which they tried to push, and they wanted to put it probably kind of somehow related. But what NVIDIA did was basically an enterprise secure version, which more, and they of course added one more twist, which is running perfectly well with NVIDIA GPU. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Which is again a little bit like a poke into the MacMini story, because MacMinis are not running on NVIDIA GPUs, right? So I think it's a little bit of kind of bloating the MacMini bubble as well if they are successful with that. So that's where the development goes for kind of a stories of it, at least here in the Western world.
Okay. So we know who it is for, who is not for, what it does, what versions there have been, and now we can finally get to my point of Jensen Huang calling out OpenClaw at the recent GTC conference, NVIDIA conference that has been happening. And so it was OpenClaw. So the keywords were OpenClaw and China. Can you explain?
Yes. So it is worth the discussion, not only that the OpenClaw usage in China is different, because I think this is a symptomatic of the AI usage is going to get different in Asian markets and in the Western markets. I don't want to generalize too much, but it invites a little bit of a broader view than just the OpenClaw. But just to start with, OpenClaw was in Asian markets so popular that the cloud and telco providers started to offer chance to install it for the people. So it was still not that easy to kind of get it right. But it was bring your own device. We're going to give OpenClaw instance on it. We teach you how to do it. So in Asia, literally on the street, there are stalls where you come and they're going to install the OpenClaw for you so you can use it. In Western, we are buying MacMinis to put it on a kind of specific device, and it's like elite thing for few people who want to kind of a little bit boast about it on LinkedIn. So that's like first dichotomy, right? So in Asia, they go for mass adoption. Whatever technology comes, they want to have the general humans. I haven't seen anybody in Berlin or Bratislava or even New York standing on a street trying to set an OpenClaw for you, right? So that's the first difference. The second difference is that in China, they have these super apps. So they are living in a different world. Like what we in a Western world have a dedicated application for food ordering, for taxi, for banking, for consuming content and so on, social media. In Asia, they have a super apps which have this all integrated, right? Now, OpenClaw gets so much easy because you need only one connector to that super app, and everything else is solved by the super app itself. So you write one set of APIs or one MCP server for that large super app, and you basically can control digitally your whole life. Okay. And it is still managed by the platform. So if the platform sees you doing something wrong, it can roll it back for you. So you don't have this issue like it's going to, on my behalf, send an notice to the employer that I want to quit, which happened, by the way, as well. It's a real story. So this is the very different diversion. So in Western markets, it's elitism thing. It's few people who want to kind of the probably top few percentage of points who want to like tech enthusiasts who want to do it. And you still need a lot of integration in different applications to make it useful. In Asia, they want to make it mass deployment, and they have a very easy app to connect it to so that you can get. And this is how different it's going to be.
One thing when discussing OpenClaw comes to my mind was the feeling I have seen online, like the CEO, CTOs discussing OpenClaw. And you're saying like many of them made the mistakes buying MacMinis and going for the MacMinis. And I have also seen stories of like, oh, here is like a Chinese company that bought 50 MacMinis and they're running it from their MacMinis and they're like doing everything for them. They set up these agents, blah, blah, blah. And what comes to my mind is like, isn't it like a FOMO, right? Like a fear of missing out in terms of like, if you doing the same thing within cloud, it's like it's in the cloud. But if you can like post on LinkedIn and say, oh, we bought like 50 Meg Minis, we're running this, it will be a local, it will be secure, it will be like low cost, everything. Like it feels much more like, oh, I'm part of the trend, and we're doing the same thing that China is doing, which, you know, like you're comparing to uncomparable things because it's a different ecosystem, like digital ecosystem.
Yes, I think Western world should take much more inspiration in this mass deployment rather than on which device it runs. Because as I said, you can perfectly run in cloud and relatively cheap, probably even cheaper than you think of. The companies buying Mac Minis, there is one more thing. So if you do it in the cloud, you're traceable. So if you want to do some half shady things, probably you're better off with Mac Mini running from your local kind of device, which you can then unplug and throw away into the river if anything happens. No kind of intentions to instruct people to do illegal things here. But I am not sure if this is FOMO. On the outside, it looks a little bit like you want to be a good driver, but you first buy a kind of an expensive car. But the expensive car like is parked in front of your garage, or like you want to be a good skier and you start with buying the most expensive ski set that you can think of. I don't know. I would not judge people just because of going that. So I don't think so. It's FOMO per se, but I think that there was a lot of enthusiasm for this and not a lot of understanding how to do it. And then like people were looking for an easy shortcut because there were like tons of videos on YouTube how to set it up for Mac Mini, right? So why don't you go buy one? And people didn't realize that there are other options. So I would say maybe it was more that the desire was a little bit ahead of thinking through.
Okay. So that brings us to bring the whole topic home, which is like, okay, what's the future here? Like, where does OpenClaw lead? Is it like a long-term thing? Is it going to be replaced by like real agents that like will be coming from these big companies that we use and trust and pay for and are not so expensive? Will I be able to, you know, get my hands on it and feel secure?
Yes. So as I said in the very start of this episode, I think it is an equally important moment as GPT or the reasoning models. So it definitely is going to have some follow-up. So it's not a hype of the month. It's not going to go away. The reason for that, it is exactly this democratization of the automation. So that's the reason. But in order for this to be useful, still few things need to happen. And as there is such a huge demand and such a also huge value added to this, then it's only a matter of a time when these missing pieces will be filled in by somebody coming with a new version, new concept. So first thing which needs to happen, the models which we now have are not suited for that. They are too big. They are too big, too slow, too consuming. So the first thing which will happen, there will be a dedicated OpenClaw models. Maybe they will be not named so, and very often they will be not named so, but it would be like wing obvious that they are for the agentic automation. The first such example is already here. A few days back, there was a Gilliam Turbo model released. I think it's ZAI, if I'm correct, who are releasing that. Again, China, surprise, surprise. But what is interesting here is, and it gives you a little bit of an idea where the things will go. It's a very good piece of kind of information. ZAI, so far, all of the models they released were open source. This is the first one which is not. Okay? So this is a bit of an idea. So I think that the companies want to try to monetize on it, build a model which is not going to be open source available. It's going to still be cheaper than the big LLMs, because the biggest issue of using OpenClaw heavily are the API costs. So how many tokens you burn. And if you can hook it with a, let's say, cheap enough model, either free, open source, or cheap enough, then this is going to accelerate the usage of the OpenClaw. So that's first thing. Second thing, we're going to see a package solutions. So something like packaging a claw plus certain amount of tokens. Because what people were trying to do when OpenClaw went out, they were trying to hook it on their Claude monthly programs, subscriptions, which very quickly Anthropic said, no, this is not desired to be done, because you're going to burn through your credit much faster, and like we probably can monetize on it a bit differently. So there will be a solutions where you're going to buy OpenClaw plus certain credits, the same way that you have, I don't know, Versal or Bolt New or Lovable, where you buy an app production plus few kind of tokens, monthly quota for that. The third thing which will happen, and is probably the biggest long-term implication, is that this is going to accelerate the employee in a box discussion. So if you remember, we had this discussion at the beginning of the year with prediction for this year, and you asked me a question, Philip, do you believe that the agentic AI will move into a situation where we're going to have a complete a worker with everything packaged into as a service? And I think that OpenClaw moment accelerates this. This is going to be exactly going that direction. This is much more likely to happen after the OpenClaw moment than it was before the OpenClaw moment. And it's only a matter of a few quarters before this is happening. Then there will be something like a closed circuit clause. So the containment will be complete. So it's a little bit like you have the best example is a closed circuit video. So that's your cameras, but the cameras, if it is done well, are not sending the image anywhere. The police or whoever needs to see that, they need to come and physically see the recording, or like ask for the extract of the recording, but it is only storing locally. So there will be OpenClaw, especially in manufacturing and other areas, where you can literally just make it a closed system. It doesn't know that there exists a world outside of that system, and it's going to only operate in that system. One thing which is super clear is also there's going to be a mobile versions of OpenClaw. And here I'm curious who's going to be the first one to release it. Technologically wise, it would be a little bit easier for the Android community to do it than iOS, especially after this recent Apple cracking down on Vibe applications in iOS. I think they're making it very clear that we do first, and then maybe we allow everybody else to follow, but you don't want anybody else lead and we have to follow. So I'm a little bit skeptical. I mean, if Siri done finally and well, it can a little bit jump over it, but they were so behind already with things relevant before the OpenClaw that I have serious doubts that they would be able now to dock in the OpenClaw into it and still be ready. So it will be yet another disruption for them. But there will be mobile versions for that. And that brings me to the last point of today's debate, which is surprisingly, this can be also so transformative that it might shuffle the cards of the AI dominance again. And what I mean by that is OpenAI, so far missing on it. So yet another area, because Anthropic Claude has at least the remote, so you can simulate it somehow. OpenAI, to the moment that we talk now, does not have anything like that available yet, to my understanding. So that's one thing. Second thing, Google is surprisingly quiet on the topic as well. We haven't seen any Google version of it. And this would be a little bit playing against them because they were not necessarily like their idea of AI was we provide it from our service and extend it as a service to you and you use it all the way down to Apple uses it for the Siri. So I don't think so that this is like going in a direction that they originally wanted to go. And it might be a bit of a disruption. It's going to be a big hit for Grok as well, for XAI, because they are nowhere to have a version of it anywhere. And by the time they're going to get one, it's going to be probably a bit late. So the same way Mistral. So all the kind of players which were trying to catch up on the LLM front will now have an issue to be able to do that. And it's going to be a serious disruption for the services like Cursor, which were relying on the IDE in a development environment for the coding, because basically it takes completely the story out of everything what happens behind the curtain is done. Don't show it to me. Don't distract me with that. Go play with your files the way you want it. In Cursor and other things, you are the one who is kind of managing the file system and deployment and GitHubs and other things. So I'm a little bit worried that if OpenClaw trend gets strong, it's going to also hurt all the coding services or research services which were kind of built on IDE.
Okay. So just to add, Google has recently launched first on some new Samsung phones and then on Pixel phones this automation feature where you can tell it to go and shop for you or call a taxi, which is kind of halfway where you might see that going. It always stops before doing the final thing. So they didn't go all the way, which actually the press appreciated, to be honest. Yeah. So that was the thing. Looking at it from the point of view of our discussion was well, what's the point if I still have to come and do the thing in the end? It's not really. It's not. I guess we will see sooner than later, right?
Yes, I think rather sooner than later, to be honest.
Okay, Philip, thank you. This has been very in depth, very on point. So thanks for the deep dive, and talk to you next time.
Yep, and by the next time we might have an OpenClaw set up for you.
Okay, we'll see.
We'll do the MacMini version.
No, I'm already canceled my order. Thank you. You've been listening to Mindset Podcast, that's spelled with AI, a tech podcast that is shaping what you think and know about AI. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, in your favorite podcast app, or both of us on LinkedIn. Till next time. Bye, Philip.